Hey there, welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining me today. We're going to explore an absolutely incredible, invisible journey that is happening inside of you right now, every single second of every single day. We're talking about breathing. Now, it seems super simple, right? You breathe in, you breathe out. But the story of what happens to a single breath of air once it enters your body is actually an epic adventure.
So think about the last time you ran really fast, maybe playing a sport or chasing down a bus. Why did you feel so exhausted? Why were you breathing so heavily? Well, your body is like a super smart machine, and just like a car needs gas to run, you need energy to move. But how does your body actually get that energy? It all starts with a single breath of air. Which brings us to a big, fancy word, respiration. What does that actually mean? Well, respiration is simply the process of taking in oxygen to unlock energy from our food and then breathing out the leftover waste gas. That's really it. It's just your body's brilliant way of turning air and food into pure power. Without this process, we literally wouldn't have the energy to do anything.
All right, let's jump straight into Chapter 1, the pathway of air. Let's follow a tiny, heroic little molecule of oxygen as it starts its journey. First stop, your nostrils. It floats in and enters your nasal cavity. Now, this isn't just some empty tunnel. It's lined with moisture and tiny hairs that act like a built-in air purifier, filtering out dust and dirt. It also warms the air up. From there, this clean, warm air travels down through your throat, past the pharynx and the larynx, which is just your voice box, until it hits the trachea. You might know the trachea better as your windpipe. You can actually feel it right on the front of your neck. And this windpipe is the express elevator straight down to your lungs. Once inside the lungs, the windpipe splits. Imagine the trunk of a tree splitting into two main branches. We call these the bronchi, one for the left lung, one for the right. And then those split into smaller and smaller and smaller twigs called bronchioles. Our little oxygen molecule is traveling deep, deep into this twisting, amazing forest of tubes.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the tricky crossing. Now wait a second, before air gets safely into the lungs, it has to pass through a totally crazy intersection at the back of your throat. Have you ever wondered why adults always tell you not to talk with your mouth full? Well, you actually have two pipes sitting right next to each other down there. One is the windpipe for air, and the other is for food heading to your stomach. So when you swallow a big bite of pizza, how does your body know to send it to the stomach and not drop it into your lungs? The hero here is a tiny flap called the epiglottis. Think of the epiglottis as your body's ultimate traffic cop. It's a little muscular valve. When you breathe, it stays wide open so air can rush in. But the exact second you swallow food, this little flap snaps down, covering up your windpipe. It literally builds a temporary bridge so food slides safely right over the windpipe and heads to the stomach. Then, pop, it opens right back up so you can breathe again. It's an automatic, highly coordinated dance, happening without you even thinking about it.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, how we actually breathe.
Okay, so the air is in the lungs. But here's a funny thing. Your lungs are basically just soft, spongy balloons. They don't have their own muscles to pull air in. So, how does the air actually get sucked into your chest? It's all thanks to some amazing teamwork between your rib cage and a special muscle called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a flat, flexible muscle that sits right underneath your lungs, making up the floor of your chest cavity. Together, your ribs and your diaphragm act like a massive, powerful pump. I really want this to be crystal clear, so let's walk through it together. When you inhale, your diaphragm flexes and flattens out, pushing downwards. This makes the inside of your chest much bigger. And because that space gets bigger, the air pressure drops, acting like a vacuum to suck air in. Let's repeat that because it's super important. When the diaphragm flattens, the space gets bigger, the pressure drops, and air is pulled in. Now, when you exhale, that diaphragm relaxes and curves back up into a dome shape. This shrinks the chest space. And again, let's repeat it. When the diaphragm curves into a dome, the space gets smaller, the pressure rises, and the air is pushed out. Boom! A perfect automatic pump.
Now for the main event, Chapter 4, the Great Gas Exchange.
This is the climax of our story. At the absolute end of all those tiny branches inside your lungs, you'll find clusters of microscopic air sacs called alveoli. They look a lot like tiny bunches of grapes, and they are wrapped tightly in tiny blood vessels called capillaries. These alveoli have incredibly thin walls, literally just one single cell thick. And the blood vessels next to them, also just one cell thick. They're pressed right up against each other. This is where our brave little oxygen molecule finishes its lung journey and simply hops right through that ultra-thin wall straight into your flowing red blood.
And here's a fact that is just completely mind-blowing. You have millions and millions of these tiny alveoli in your chest. If you were to somehow take all those little air sacs, open them up, and lay them out totally flat, they would cover about 160 square meters. That is the size of an entire tennis court. All that surface area is packed up neatly inside your ribs, perfectly designed to soak up as much oxygen as humanly possible.
To prove this invisible swap is really happening, let's just compare the air you breathe in with the air you breathe out. The air you inhale is about 21% oxygen, but the air you exhale, it only has 16%. Why? Because that missing oxygen jumped into your blood. Meanwhile, look at carbon dioxide. You breathe in barely a trace of it, but you breathe out 4.4%. Why? Because carbon dioxide is your body's waste gas. Let's lock in this super important rule. Oxygen enters the blood to give you energy, while waste carbon dioxide leaves the blood to be breathed out. I'm going to say it one more time so it sticks. Oxygen enters the blood, carbon dioxide leaves the blood. That's the great gas exchange.
Chapter 5. Delivering oxygen to cells. So the oxygen is finally in the blood, but it still has to get to your brain, your leg muscles, your toes. How does it actually travel through that flowing liquid? Well, it uses a taxi service. Inside your red blood cells, there's a really cool protein called hemoglobin. It's an iron-rich pigment, and actually, that iron is exactly what makes your blood look red. You can think of hemoglobin as a massive fleet of tiny taxis cruising through your bloodstream. As soon as the oxygen crosses over from the lungs, it hops right into an empty hemoglobin taxi. Then those taxis zoom around your body, dropping oxygen off at any cell that's hungry for energy.
But this taxi system only works if there's enough oxygen around to pick up. Imagine a mountaineer climbing a giant snowy peak. Way up high, the air is super thin. There's way less oxygen up there than down at sea level. Because of this, the little hemoglobin taxis driving through the lungs can't find enough oxygen passengers. They're basically driving around with empty seats. Without full taxis, the body gets completely exhausted. And that is exactly why high-altitude climbers usually have to carry extra tanks of oxygen, just to make sure their cellular taxis stay full and their bodies stay energized.
And finally, Chapter 6, Summary and Exam Question.
Wow, we've made it. We followed a breath of air all the way from the nose down to the deepest cells. You've done an awesome job keeping up with this. Let's do a quick 3-point summary to cement all this in your brain. First, the pathway. Air travels from the nostrils, gets filtered, passes the epiglottis traffic cop, goes down the windpipe, and lands in millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. Second, the mechanics. The diaphragm muscle acts like a giant pump, flattening down to pull air in and curving up to push air out. And third, the exchange. Inside those alveoli, oxygen swaps places with waste carbon dioxide and catches a ride on a hemoglobin taxi to fuel the whole body.
Now let's put that awesome new knowledge to the test. Here is a very common exam question you'll probably see on a biology test. The question is, what is the role of the diaphragm in respiration? Think back to that pump we just talked about. How exactly does it work?
And here is the perfect A+ answer. It changes the volume of the chest cavity. When it flattens out, it decreases the pressure inside the chest, which pulls air in. When it relaxes into a dome shape, it increases the pressure, pushing air out. If you can explain that, you completely understand the core mechanics of breathing. You are totally ready to ace this topic on your next test. Our heroic oxygen molecule has finished its journey, unlocking the energy you need to run, play, and live. But it kind of makes you wonder, what other wild, invisible journeys are happening inside you right now, just waiting to be explored? Thanks so much for hanging out with me in this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.